Hello, and welcome to the CoStar News Hotels podcast. I'm Natalie Harms, reporter for CoStar News, and today I'm joined by Paul Eckert, Executive Vice President of Operations and Business Intelligence at Davidson Hospitality. Paul, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Natalie.
So, today we are going to chat a bit about historic hotels, which is one of my favorite topics. So, Paul, Davidson has 11 properties in its portfolio that are nearly or over a century old. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, we have quite the collection of grand vintage hotels.
I love that. Well, I mean, that's a pretty significant amount. So, how has Davidson really carved out this niche in managing these types of properties?
I think Davidson has some great partners, and our partners are all different as far as the hotel owners. And there are owners that want to own a hotel for an indefinite period of time and a long-term management arrangement and partnership. And I think we have carved out a niche because we only operate full-service hotels, and we don't focus on other smaller properties. And so I think our owners know that if they want consistent service and they want us to pull through a brand narrative of a hotel, and a historic hotel has a very distinct story, and that story has to be delivered through every touch point that a guest experiences, pre-arrival all the way till departure.
Mhm.
And I think that we do a very good job of that.
Yeah, well, we are going to talk all about those individual touch points, and I'm excited to dive in to that. And maybe for some context, can you tell me a little bit about your job and how it intersects with the historic hotel portfolio at Davidson? And, what kind of drives your interest in these types of properties?
Yeah, so my role with the company is as I oversee operations of a very diverse portfolio of assets, focused with one of our larger ownership groups. I also oversee our strategic operations for the company, which has a lot to do with standards and execution and deliverables for the guest experience and for our team members. And so within my portfolio, I have three properties of the 11 that I directly oversee that are of over 100 years old.
I think one of my favorite parts of a historic hotel is kind of, being, at the property and getting to learn about which parts of the buildings are original and from what era. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the, hotels in your portfolio that have that historic architecture that guests can admire today.
Yeah, the my favorite that I talk about is our oldest, and so the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, was actually started to be built in 1886, and it was finished in 1887 after 93 days. And so, if you think about building a very iconic, large hotel back in the late 1800s, just the feat of building this 100% wood built building in 93 days is really something that's very unique. The architecture of the hotel has been maintained to this day, and so we just finished our 138th season at the resort, and the resort and the island are actually only open for a little over 6 months of the year. And so, we open at the end of April, heading into May, and we wrap up as we did last week on October 27th. And so, if you think about a northern Michigan location, wood-built, constructed hotel, 138 years later, that's still standing, it really is a marvel of an architectural feat.
That's really crazy. Just hearing you say that, it makes me like, this is on my bucket list now. I have to actually lay eyes and hands and actually experience this in person because that sounds kind of wild and really segues nicely into another thing I want to ask about is preservation. I assume there's an added level of difficulty in maintaining a historic hotel. And maybe you could talk a little bit broadly about that experience and then zoom in a little bit on the relationship that operators and owners have to, work as a team to deliver on preservation.
Well, one of the things is, if your property is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, there's governance to what you can and can't do with the facade or exterior of the building. And so one of the main things to focus in on and be aware of is is that the pristine nature of the building is something that isn't, it's regulated to some degree. And so all of our 11 properties that we have, we obviously work with local entities and also the National Registry if there's any updates that we need to make. An example of this is windows. You have to replace windows over time. Well, at the Hotel Viking in Newport Island, up in the Northeast, what we have experienced is the windows need to be replaced. Well, in order to replace the windows, you actually have to go to the Historic Preservation Society, give them a sample, and then show them how the application would be applied to the building. So there's a lot more of an investment in maintaining a historic hotel. And there's also some regulatory, oversights, if you will, from local community and also from National Registry.
Yeah, I think it's such a common topic that I hear about too is operators and owners kind of striking that balance and working together. And that's not even talking about his specific historic property. So I wonder what are some tips, I guess, you would have or advice for navigating kind of a healthy relationship in that way.
Yeah, well, everything comes to communication and cadence and making sure that everyone's informed and on the same page. So I can tell you that the three historic properties that I oversee, we actually have a weekly call
Mm.
to talk about capital deployment and also talk about projects and updates. And so we have at Davidson, we have our own design and construction division, and they represent us and help us navigate these projects. On the receiving end of the call is our ownership group. So we are very collaborative and we make sure that we're always dialed in together and looking at the same things through the same lens. And we actually plan far out. That's one of the things with a
Mhm.
historic hotel is, a brand new hotel, you're going to renovate every 7 years. A historic hotel, you're going to be repairing and maintaining a lot of things every year, regardless of if you want to or not. It's
Mhm.
a requirement of the building in order to maintain it and keep it pristine and deliver it to the guests the correct way. So that said, we do usually a 5-year plan at the beginning when we enter into a relationship with an ownership group to make sure we're aligned on what does the next 5 years look like. And then each year we update the plan for the next 5 years. So it's an ongoing rolling 5-year plan for the capital deployment for your historic asset.
Wow. Yes. Very, very hands-on, it sounds like. So another kind of thing I think historic hotels have to balance is the guest experience. I think a lot of guests booking at a historic hotel, they want that historic hotel experience, but they also want their creature comfort. They're on vacation. They want to have all the things they need to enjoy themselves. So how do you find that balance between giving guests that historic experience and also giving them their creature comforts? What have you found are their priorities in each of those spaces?
Let's start with the most obvious, which is guests stay at hotels because it's a lodging accommodation for them. The historic, pristine nature of the lobby and the public areas of a historic hotel aren't necessarily what the guest wants to experience in the guest room. So, if the hotel was built 100 years ago, the room itself needs to have all the modern comforts that you mentioned. And so, we try to strike a balance with the design of the room to still be a nod back to the original intention of the hotel from a design perspective, but we use it with more modern touches. So, if you think about um, technology as an example. People typically would not want to see modern technology inside of a historic lobby of a hotel. When they get to their guest room, that entire mentality changes because they need to be able to get on Wi-Fi and they need to be able to use all of their devices as they see fit. So we try to outfit the guest rooms appropriately. In some locations, the TV serves as a piece of artwork when it's off. And so that complements the room and it doesn't detract from the fact that you have this pristine historic guest room to stay the night in. We also have TVs that serve as mirrors in some of our rooms. So I think that's a good example of the balance of like technology with the authenticity of the design of the hotel, nodding back to the original historic nature of it.
That's a great point. I never thought of it that way. It's like we want to enjoy the history of a hotel and the lobby and at the exterior, but once we're in our rooms, we want to be able to charge our devices and watch TV. So we talked a little bit about kind of the preservation elements and renovations. Can you talk about maybe an example of a recent renovation and how you navigated that, kind of the bigger kind of renovations versus the upkeep?
Yeah, so the Davenport Hotel, which is in Spokane, Washington, we have been updating that hotel pretty much every year for the last 3 years. And so one of the things that we were very mindful of is the guest experience still needs to provide all of the pleasantries and ease of service that they would like. we acknowledged and got feedback from the guests that, the coffee experience for that hotel was kind of limited, if you will. So we did have a nice coffee counter in the beautiful lobby of the hotel, but we also had a vacant space that sat adjacent, that was not being used. It was actually completely empty. And so we did some research and we worked, with the local, building department, and understood that we couldn't change the exterior of the building, but we could take that space and turn it into something meaningful that complements the brand of the hotel. And so that hotel was built by, Mr. Davenport, Louis Davenport, back in 1912. And so we thought it would be a good nod, because we sell a lot of peanut brittle. That's one of the things the hotel's known for. That we would build out a coffee experience that was also a boutique, retail offering, as well as a grab and go food offering, but we needed it to look exactly like it's always been there. And so we worked with a design firm called Bishop Pass, and they actually specialize in projects like this. And so we built this emporium offering, and guests that have been coming to the hotel for years and some decades said it looks like it's always been here. And so, if you think about, if you were, in a train station in New York City, in the late, call it early 1900s, the tile that we have in that space is complementary of that feel. The ceiling treatments is complementary of that feel, but it still has a clean, modern look relative to like the equipment that we purchased and that we put into the space. So that was one good project that we did as far as a renovation. And then we also added a lobby bar into the hotel where the existing coffee offering was. And we had to keep all of the columns that were in the lobby per the Historic Preservation Society. So we actually built a bar embracing these columns. And if you go into the second floor of the hotel and you look down, it looks like it was always there. It looks like Louis Davenport designed to put a bar right there with these four columns. No, those are two examples. The guest rooms, we are also renovating the guest rooms. And Spokane's known as the Lilac City. And one of the things that we wanted to do was try to tie the hotel back into the early days of the hotel design, which did have lilac in it. So we actually have a lilac textured wall covering that's in the main room, the guest room, that sits behind the headboard. So it's a real nod, but it's subtle. But it also keeps, and the guest room is still, as I mentioned before, it's got your modern touches, but it feels like it's appropriately outfitted for that hotel.
Yeah, I think my takeaway from that is introducing new elements. You have to go with a cohesive kind of approach. Make it look like it's always been there. That's very cool because you know at the end of the day, a lot of people are booking for that historic hotel experience. And so, speaking of experience, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the ways you kind of deliver on that promise at the hotels, whether that's, in-house historians, kind of almost museum-looking exhibitions I know I've seen in some cases. So tell me a little bit about some of the ones you have.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. We actually charge admissions there. So people
Mhm,
go to the island to visit the hotel and walk through it as it's a museum. It's
mhm.
it's actually something to go see and enjoy. And we do have a historian on site, and we do multiple tours a day that people actually pay for. And he gives you the deep history of the property. And so he's been there for five decades, and he knows a lot about the island history and the nature of the architecture. In that hotel, we actually have a rotating art museum that one of the locals that lives on the island provides the art, and we exchange it out each year. At the Davenport Hotel that I mentioned in Spokane, Scott is a bellman of ours, and he's been at the hotel for 20 years. He does tours on the weekends for guests and takes them through. We actually just did a large event over the weekend for Halloween where he was doing tours 3 times a day because of the volume of people that were booking a specific package that wanted the historical tour included as part of their stay. So there's a lot of that. And then we also have partnerships with local entities. That's the other thing, like the Hotel Viking that I mentioned up in Newport Island. We have partnerships there. The Jazz Festival is a mainstay of that marketplace. And so, we participate and partner with the Jazz Festival. We do events, and we have people on the rooftop bar singing jazz vignettes at night during the festival. So again, that hotel was built by the locals because they wanted a gathering spot. And so we're trying to honor history of why that hotel was built. And we try to create a sense of community where people can gather and visit with each other up on the hilltop in Newport.
So you mentioned over Halloween having kind of a specific tour, which makes me wonder how many of your hotels in this historic profile have like rumors of haunting? And is that something y'all play into? Do you scale it back a little bit? I just wonder how y'all navigate that.
There are stories about hauntings, and I mentioned Scott, the bellman from the Davenport, and he will tell stories of that there's a ghost up on the seventh floor of the building, and that every once in a while you'll be walking down the hall and you'll hear a voice, but you won't see a person. And so we lean into that to the extent that the customer wants to hear about it. Obviously, if you have little kids, that's not something that they want to hear about, and so it's very targeted, but we embrace it where it makes sense. And we try to honor, again, just the narrative of the hotel and what has come to be something that people want to experience or look for.
So it's a read the room situation. Got it.
Yes.
What about, when it comes to group and events, are there specific challenges navigating these types of bookings? Is it, a bigger type of business for historic hotels, or does it just kind of depend by the property?
I'd say it depends by the property, but those that have any kind of an attachment to a specific hotel throughout the lineage of their family, we find that that does come up that, two or three people from the same family were married in the same environment at some
Mhm.
point in time. And, you know, we try to honor, what the requests are from the weddings. I'd say weddings are, it's supposed to be a one-time event. The location selection is very critical. And, what we are seeing now is that people like unique venues. They don't want to be in a traditional ballroom at a hotel. They don't want to be in a traditional garden, gazebo. And so people that do pick historic hotels for weddings, they have high expectations, and it is something that we always have to be not acknowledged and aware of. But to say that a wedding is any more challenging or difficult than a group meeting, everyone has different needs, and so I'd say that for us to navigate large events at these properties when they're older, it is a little more challenging because if you think about a hotel that was built 100 years ago, the requirements of what elevators looked like as far as how many passenger cars you need. So it can take longer to get to places in historic hotels. That is one of the unique challenges. And then they also, 100 years ago, the way things were built were much different. And so, accessibility is something you always have to be mindful of as well.
That's a great point, um, and something to think about for sure. So, kind of speaking of experience, the historic hotel experience, I love when names of hotels, names of on-site restaurants or bars are a nod to the hotel's history. And I think Davidson's portfolio has a lot of examples of this. So I wonder if you could tell us some of your favorites, whether it's a nod to history or region.
So I know I'm talking a lot about Mackinac Island, but it is the most unique asset that I've ever seen. The island itself, that cannot have a motorized vehicle, so everyone gets around on horse-drawn carriage. And so part of the history of that is that there were native horses to the island, and so the Jockey Club is a restaurant that we operate there with to the jockeys that rode the horses. And so that's a great example of pulling through a little history at the same time, delivering a branded restaurant experience that's complementary to why people are coming to the island. And horses are a main draw. I mean, where can you go in the United States and you can't use a motorized vehicle? And you are forced to either ride a bike or walk or take a horse-drawn carriage.
Yeah, that is super unique and cool. So I think just kind of zooming out on historic hotels and whether or not it's a trend of people liking to go book a stay at these types of hotels, is it something that you feel like has grown over the years and over your career? And if so, where do you see it heading?
It's definitely grown because I think the consumer interests have changed. I'll give you an example. My father, when he traveled for business, he wanted to know that the room he was going to stay in and the hotel he's going to stay in was very consistent regardless of what city he went to. I would say that the travelers now are much more adventurous, and they expect consistency of service. They expect consistency of deliverables, of the bed's comfortable and there's not noise in the room and those things. But they don't necessarily want to be in the same room in a different city and not know where they're at. And so I think the interest in historic hotels has actually been growing because the unique nature of them and the fact that they have a heritage that a brand new built hotel can never have. I have 4 kids, and I can tell you that their intellectual curiosity is far greater than mine was because they have so much at their fingertips from a technology perspective. So if you are going to travel to a city, why not find a very unique hotel that has something of interest to you that you can connect with, and that the historic nature of these hotels is very intriguing to people. You can go stay at a beautiful modern hotel in any city in the United States. Every city in the United States has some historic hotels. Those historic hotels have things that you're not going to see in a modern environment. So my personal opinion is it's growing because people are very into unique experiences now, and they also want to be able to, on their own social media pages, express who they are. And I think where you stay, what you eat, what music you listen to, they're all lifestyle defining characteristics of you as a person. There are people, like I described my father, he likes consistency and he would, stay at a certain brand of a hotel when he traveled. There's a little more of an adventurous nature of travelers now.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we're seeing that in other trends as well. But something you said, about consistency, I do see, at least in kind of broadly, but also in Davidson's portfolio, there are some branded historic hotels, a lot of independent hotels too. But, how does the brand factor in to kind of telling consumers, yeah, this is a consistency, check. We've got this brand associated. Does that help?
It does. We have some of our historic properties are autograph collections by Marriott, as an example. The Marriott brand carries a certain weight of consistency of services, goods, and product deliverables, right? So I think for those that put a lot of weight into brands and are loyal to brands, it's definitely very helpful for the hotel because you have people that can stay at, I think Marriott has 27 brands now. Well, the autograph collection brand it's a soft brand. So it actually allows you to take a historic hotel and still have the benefits of people finding you through the Marriott channel, but also getting that authentic experience that they would not have at a non-historic hotel, but they're getting the benefits of the brand bringing them to it and the brand defining the fact that they're going to get a certain level of service.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, I could talk about historic hotels all day, and we could go on and on and on, but we'll go ahead and end the episode here before we get off on too big of a historic hotel tangent. Thank you so much for joining me, Paula. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Natalie. Take care.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen and Lodging podcast. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of the CoStar News Hotels podcast was recorded November 3rd, 2025 by Natalie Harms and edited by Rachel Daub. Look for this and more at costar.com/hotelnews and subscribe anywhere you like to listen to podcasts.